Hello. Morning all. Good to see you. Oh,
Morning,
just
Fiona.
just hit 12 o'clock, so good afternoon now. Good to see you, Karen and Chris.
Hi.
Oh, hi, Fiona. You okay?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
Not bad.
Good.
Finished the class yesterday, so that's
Oh, well done.
pass. So that was
Excellent.
good.
You'll have your certificate soon then.
Yes, all downloaded and ready.
Frame it and put it on your wall.
Yeah.
Morning. Sorry, I've turned my camera off because I'm sat underneath a massive blanket.
We can see you though at the moment under your blanket.
I know, I've just turned the video back on. I'm going to turn it back off again.
Okay.
Hi, Sanko. Nice to see you.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Good.
Yeah, well, good, thank you. I'm at the Tech Show London in the Excel Centre.
Hello?
Talking about circular economy shortly on the main stage, so that'll be exciting.
Oh, sorry, I just missed that. I think my internet cut out.
Oh, okay. I was saying I'm at the Tech Show in London, talking on the main stage about circular economy shortly.
Wow, okay. Well, good luck.
It's a brand new audience for me, so be interesting to see what
So
questions we
exciting.
get. Great. So I'm really conscious that we've got lots to get through in this hour session. So I think we're probably going to make a start, and then people can be coming in as I'm introducing the session. If that's okay with everyone. Are we recording, Imogen? Yes. Brilliant. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest in the series of the Circular Economy Hub webinars. And this one is focusing on moving towards a circular MedTech sector. I'm Fiona Charnley, and alongside Peter Hopkinson, I'm co-director of the UKRI Circular Economy Hub, which is part of the NICER programme, which aims to accelerate and scale our transition towards a UK circular economy. So just a few points of housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to our website. So please do feel free to share that link with anyone else that couldn't make the session today. Also, if you do not wish to be included in the recording, please keep your cameras off. And also, please, if you could keep your microphones off while our speakers are presenting, that would be great. However, we do encourage questions. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please do pop them in the chat, or wait until the end and then raise your hand and come on the microphone and ask them live. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers to introduce and discuss the important challenge of how we can accelerate our transition towards a circular healthcare and particularly MedTech system. So first of all, we're going to be hearing from our very own Georgie Hopkins, and she'll be presenting findings from our MedTech Spotlight report, which has just been released. And she'll be joined by Karen Mayer, who's Deputy Director for Data Analysis and Resilience in the Medical Technology Directorate at the Department of Health and Social Care. Also joining us is Chris Taylor, who is Sustainability Lead for the UK at Philips, and also Sanko Dimov, who is Senior Net Zero Delivery Manager at NHS England. So really excited to hear from them all. And just to give you a bit of an introduction to our kind of wider project, as many of you will know, this webinar is part of the Circular Economy Hub webinar series, in which we cover a wide range of topics related to the circular economy adoption and implementation across different sectors. This webinar is slightly different, however, as it's the first one that reports on our sector-based research that we've been conducting over the past year. And our sector project aims to engage those sectors that aren't the usual suspects and haven't necessarily received as much attention from a circular economy perspective yet. However, they are areas of national importance and we believe have significant potential for circular economy adoption and implementation, and significant potential for transformation. And so healthcare and specifically medical technology is the first of 5 sectors that we've been looking at. And the others include hospitality, electronics, renewables, in particular solar PV, and finance as an enabler. And those reports will be coming out later in the year and will also be accompanied by webinars. So we're really excited to tell you about the work that we've been doing that's focusing on circular medtech, and I'm going to hand over to Georgie first of all, who will be sharing findings of our Spotlight report.
Great, thanks, Fiona. Brilliant. Okay, so next slide. Thank you, Imogen. So first off, just a really quick acknowledgement and thanks to all our collaborators. So we really appreciate having worked alongside Department of Health and Social Care, and in particular the Design for Life Collaborative. And thank you really to all the partners, individuals and organisations who've engaged with us in this research. It's really added a lot of depth and value to it. So the next slide, please. The medtech sector, I know we've probably got a lot of people in the room who are very familiar with it, but just for those who are new to it, so it's a term that captures all medical devices. It literally goes from a bandage to an MRI scanner. There are around 2 million medtech devices that are registered for use in the UK, and around 500,000 different product types are used regularly by the NHS. In terms of NHS spend, it represents about £10 billion per annum. So I guess in a nutshell, it's a really important economic sector. It's really important socially in terms of delivering our healthcare services, and it covers a really diverse product base. So we go to next slide. What we worked through in our report is then looking at kind of what's the problem, and it's a system under stress. We tend to look at this through this kind of value chain approach. So we're looking at the inflow, in use and outflow, and we can see some of the challenges that are really being faced by the system. Plus there's this feedback loop sitting on top of that, where the impact of the climate crisis and the pollution is actually compounding the demand for healthcare. And so then in terms of from here, us at the CE Hub, what's the potential solution? We see that solution really as the circular economy. So next slide, please, Imogen. Thank you. So when we're looking at the circular economy, we're thinking of those 3 pillars, which are designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and material in use for the longest time possible at their highest value possible, and regenerating natural systems. And that's an economy that's run entirely on renewable energy. So I think a key point to note at this point is that those inner loops are often the most valuable at maintaining that value within the system. So when we're looking at maintain and reuse, reprocessing, refurbishment, those are often more advantageous than perhaps when we get to the outer loops around material recycling and urban mining. The critical part, though, particularly within medtech, it's a complex dynamic system. So actually what we really need to do is take that systems perspective and combine and consolidate different circular interventions for maximum value creation. So then the next slide, thank you. So something we look at then is it already happening within medtech? And the answer to that is yes. So we're seeing that there's adoption and implementation of the circular economy within the existing regulatory and policy frameworks. These examples are very often being led by kind of motivated clinicians, startups and innovative suppliers. And leading on from that, what we see is that innovative funding can really accelerate the adoption, especially at those grassroots levels. So some activities there that we saw, kind of the Green Surgery Challenge, NHS Innovation Services and the Accelerated Access Collaborative are really assisting that. What we also saw from the case studies that we pulled out was that there's clear economic, carbon and wider benefits demonstrated in many of the cases. What we know is that this is already kind of growing business across USA and other advanced healthcare nations. In the UK, we're making progress, but it's perhaps lagging behind that slightly. Another thing that we saw within that is that technology and digital infrastructure are really key enablers for tracking and validation, and that particularly becomes critical when we're looking at reverse logistics and in this sector around sterilisation and decontamination. Another element from the case studies that we saw is that involving clinicians and patients is really critical. There's a big piece of behaviour change that needs to happen to switch to a circular medtech, and when we saw successful projects, they're engaging with those end users. And then final point on that, is the data systems building that evidence base. They're really nascent and there are gaps in understanding. So what we're doing there is we're having difficulty to find and access that data, bring it together. There's some challenges around interoperability, and it means that potentially some opportunities are being missed at this stage. So if we just go to the next slide. One of the parts of our work within this report was that we delivered a kind of illustrative case example, and that's exactly what this is. This was about us, and this is some of the work that we do through the Data Observatory at the CE Hub. It's about finding the data, understanding it, and doing some high-level modelling to sort of demonstrate impact. So we looked at harmonic shears. It's a single-use device that's already being used across around 35 sites in NHS England. It's permitted for remanufacture under MHRA guidelines. So what we saw there is that NHS England as an estimated spend, it's around 100 million of procurement spend in this 10-year period. We can see that 71% of those devices are eligible for remanufacture, but only a very small percentage are actually being remanufactured. But the opportunity sits there because we see it's around about 50% in terms of the purchase price and around about a 50% carbon saving when we're looking at that remanufactured device against the OEM original. So we modelled some scenarios, and like I said, this is high-level modelling just to kind of demonstrate proof of evidence really here. Low Circular was saying, well, if this is happening in 35 sites across the NHS in NHS England, what happens if we roll it across the whole of NHS England at that existing level? Enhanced Circular was where we then said, okay, and we're going to increase the number of remanufactured devices by 1,000 every year as we move forward through this model time. And then Circular Plus built on that again, not just are we going to use more remanufactured devices, we're going to use those remanufactured devices with a greater intensity. So they would have 3 remanufactured cycles rather than 2, which is existing. And I think the key part that comes out of this is that it demonstrates that reuse of single-use devices is a practical reality. We're seeing there that we've got economic saving, we've got material reduction, and we've got a carbon footprint reduction. I think there's one thing to note, and these are obviously just scenarios that we've created, but even on that kind of Circular Plus there, we're only hitting just over 9% carbon reduction. And then when we match that, and that's between now and 2030, and when we match that back to the NHS net zero targets, that's not enough to reach those targets. So while there's a case to expand remanufactured and the use of remanufactured items within the MedTech sector, we do need wider systemic innovations as well. So as part of the report, in terms of what are the challenges, thank you, Imogen, for the next slide. We kind of worked through here. I won't take you through all of them. There's a lot of detail in the report around these, but we see them under six pillars. So clinical efficacy and safety, that's a critical part around this particular sector. Leadership and behaviour change, and that's really needing that clear leadership and understanding of the cultural changes to get systems level implementation. Regulatory and policy, and that's including guidance and standards, and it's about shaping the behaviours and the commercial drivers within the sector. Economic and value creation is something that we see across a number of sectors. It's about that linear lock-in of how to overcome the legacy systems and the prior investments, as well as that cost of transitioning to circular business models. System and product innovation, again, it's about developing programmatic innovation over these incremental shifts and perhaps overcoming that single life mindset that is quite ingrained within the sector. And then infrastructure and facilities is really a great opportunity for innovation because there's a general recognition that there's a lack of facilities, equipment and workforce to deliver what's going to be needed for a circular medtech, and that's particularly around sterilisation and decontamination services. Thank you, Imogen, for the next slide. So how do we overcome these challenges? The way we approach this is through kind of 4 key building blocks. So when we're looking at design to begin with, that's that fully integrated design of products and services to reduce the reliance on single-use devices, promote maintenance, life extension, and eliminate those toxic materials that are preventing circulation. When we consider business models, that's really shifting to total cost of ownership and new models that are performance-based deals and incentivise greater utilisation. And we know there's a really good opportunity also to engage digital technology and machine-based learning to really capture those opportunities. In terms of reverse logistics, it is moving from linear to circular. So we've got to coordinate actors and build collaborations that don't necessarily exist already. And that's so that we can get those reverse loops going and recirculate valuable products, components and materials. And then in terms of the system enablers, as one of the building blocks that we see, I think particularly within MedTech, that's around leadership. And that's resolving those tensions around circular innovation within this complex dynamic system. It's providing that roadmap, the KPI setting, and helping to address those short-term trade-offs. Thank you, Imogen. The other way that we looked at this when we were working through it is going, okay, well, how do we accelerate change? Who are the stakeholders and who are the actors here who can really make a difference? And we broke that down into 5 key groups within the sector. Regulators and policymakers really holding that role as catalysts, and that's where they can provide that clear vision and galvanise stakeholders. Industry and supply chain, we see that as the innovation heart, particularly with a strong focus of SMEs within the sector. And that's about really building on those CE building blocks across the value chain. Clinicians and patients, and we saw this through all the case examples of the pockets of activity where this is happening, they're the pioneers. So they need to be sharing their insight of what actually happens on the ground when we're using and shifting to the circular practices, and embrace the behaviour change around that. NHS providers and healthcare providers, and particularly the NHS, they're the accelerators. They're the really linchpins in the system. They lead the collaboration and the innovation channels. And then sitting back, I guess, on our side, academics and research partners as investigators, that's about really bringing those cross-sector insights into the sector and sharing those frameworks for change that we see in different sectors. Thank you, Imogen. So then it's moving into kind of what are the actionable next steps. What we've seen are like promising pilots. There are isolated case studies, but the UK at this point in time isn't really accelerating in this area. We see our comparators across USA and Europe, Germany with a particular focus, who are kind of further ahead in the CE adoption and implementation. So for us to move forward rapidly, we need some clear leadership and collaborative action. But I think what this has shown us is that there is opportunity here, that circular medtech has got this positive business case, and it really can show short-term procurement savings. We can see carbon savings. You know, it's providing private sector innovation, and it's fulfilling those government policy requirements around resource security, resilience and waste. And while all the time this is happening at the moment in those small case studies, it's still protecting patient safety. So I think from our side, this is a real whistle-stop tour. Phase one really is where we've got to with this report, and it's providing that insight and diagnostic of the current systems level maturity across MedTech. We've identified those pain points, the value creation opportunities, and what's really key for the next thing is moving into this kind of structured piloting across a wider range of MedTech applications, which builds that proof of value and enables us to get into systematic scaling of circular economy solutions. So thank you. I'm going to pause, take a breath. There's an awful lot in the report. I think the final slide now. Please do download it. It's available from the CE Knowledge Hub. And at this point, I'm going to pass on to Karen, who will pick up with where the Design for Life collaborative programme is.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. If I haven't already met you at some of these events, so I'm Karen Mayer. I'm Deputy Director for Data and Analysis and Resilience in MedTech at DHSE. I just wanted to first say thank you to Fiona and Georgie and the rest of the team for inviting me today, but also to congratulate them on the publication. It's a report that my team have been very excited about for some time now, and we've been very lucky over the last year to be able to work with the team on the project. So we've got a bit of a mixed audience today in terms of knowledge about the DHSE programme. So I just wanted to just spend 1 minute, one slide, just setting out where it sort of fits in all of this. So Design for Life is a programme that DHSE launched a year ago. I think it's a year ago in 2 weeks. So we're very much nearing the 1 year mark in terms of our launch event. And it is a collaborative. So that is by design, because we as a department, and as Georgie pointed out, can't answer all the questions, but there are so many different actions to be taken in this space that will really require a cross-stakeholder approach. So a really light and spotlight report, the sort of catalyst piece for government, but then there are roles for everybody. So the actors in this space are very vast, and we've got everything from industry, academia, innovators, incumbents, policy, but also at various dimensions, so local, national and international in terms of sort of the policy impacts there. So in terms of the aims of the programme, and I just wanted to flag at this point, we haven't yet published the roadmap, and I will come back to that at the end. But as a consequence of that, please do take everything I say here as work in progress from the departmental perspective. So we have a vision to try and reduce reliance on single-use plastics in MedTech and make recycling, remanufacturing and materials recovery the default. This is obviously very ambitious, but we think it has multiple benefits. And the project itself was born out of our MedTech strategy, which we published a year ago. And in that, priority one was about resilient markets. And the project sort of came out of that initial focus on resilience. But there are a range of really wide range of potential benefits from the project and these initiatives in terms of jobs, the economy, sustainability, and overall costs. So while the origins of the project are resilience, we don't think there's a hierarchy to the objectives that we've kind of stated there. And similar to what Georgie said, there's a whole range of benefits to be had. So on next slide, please, Imogen. So those of you who are part of the collaborative will have heard and participated in all of this work, probably more so than me because I only joined in December. But there were a range of working groups that worked on various themes and topics over the summer last year and into the early autumn. And this resulted in over 90 recommendations of things that could be done to sort of take action in the sector. Our advisory group noted that there were quite a lot of interdependencies between the recommendations, different levels of granularity, the challenge to sort of try and break that up into projects. So we had an event in November where we presented the first cut of the recommendations, but they were still overlapping quite a bit. And I think we could quite clearly articulate the angle on there's lots to do here, but we could slightly less clearly articulate the so where do we start bit. And so that's what we've been working on through December and January, where we've looked at a set of problem statements with sub-issues attached. So that approach was very much to make sure that we were clear on what it is that we were trying to tackle. Also looking at sort of that we were content with the recommendations and the actions and that we could fully understand how they fit and interacted with each other. And also that they were clear and actually deliverable. So then over the course of February, we've been workshopping those with smaller groups of members from the collaborative to get to those specific actions. So what are we going to do and try and get consensus on the first few of those. So I think I only came to this project a few months ago, but I think what strikes you immediately is just how vast it is. And I personally struggled to articulate how we were going to approach that in the context of the 90 recommendations. So we tried to develop a bit of a hierarchy, which we set out on the next slide. So trying to set out clearly. Sorry, Imogen, next slide, please. Thank you. So we set out clearly sort of what is the problem, the overarching one, what specifically are the things that are barriers to change here, and if that is the problem, then where do we want to get to? And we've considered those the outputs, and what does that look like? So what is our vision here? And then given that, what are the sort of overarching things that need to be done to get there? And for us as a group, who needs to do what and how do we allocate those out? So on the next slide, we have set out the problem statements. These will look fairly similar to the topic themes that Georgie presented earlier. They've slightly reworked because once we started looking at it from a sort of challenge, we repackaged them a bit, and data is also more prominent. That is not due to my arrival on the project, but it was very much sort of reflected in a lot of the recommendations we received. So the key things that have come out are very much the feedback we received from stakeholder groups and the collaborative as a whole is that policy direction piece. What do we want to achieve here? What are the metrics that we're going to be looking at and measuring ourselves against to be able to be clear that we are achieving it? In doing that, it's clear that behaviour change will be needed, and that is across the piece, say from procurement specialists to clinicians to industry, us as policymakers, we need to be looking at this market and this sector in a different way and consider that when we're making our policy decisions. Having said that, it is still a market. So the commercial side is equally important and will be a major factor in influencing direction of travel. So we need to be considering that holistically. We've also heard a lot about, We've also heard a lot about on the problem statement 4, just on the previous slide, sorry, Imogen, the regulatory angle. So we hear a lot about sort of barriers, regulatory barriers and standards. And I think from further discussions and deep dives we've had with groups that, we've noticed that some of these aren't actually regulatory issues, but local approaches to implementation, guidelines, and that sort of specific angle. So that's something that we're looking into in more detail. And part of the regulatory angle is also that we're operating in an international market. So alignment is really important. But similarly, MedTech cuts across lots of different regulated sectors. So, waste regulations are something that we also need to consider, and that means you've got multiple regulators at play. In terms of the fifth problem statement, so that's physical and digital, inevitably, if we're gonna make this sort of shift, there are things that will need to change from a physical estates infrastructure, but we will also need to make sure we're making those digital links. And I think finally, this is an area that's ripe for innovation. There's really transformative innovation will need to be supported to really result in breaking the market and those sorts of developments. So on the next slide, I'm not going to dwell too long on this, mostly because I'm looking at time. Just want to sort of set out that for each of those problem statements, we've identified solutions, worked with the various collaborative groups on this, and then the actions and next steps. So we've tried to break it down. And we know that lots and lots of you are doing work in this space, and we don't want to own all the actions. I personally don't want to own all the actions. There are enough to go around. So part of the workshops has been to sort of specify who's doing what, who's going to take it forward, linking people up, be that with us or with other people in the collaborative, because there are lots of things going on and there is a lot of really good will out there as well in terms of starting to take those actions. So we are defining this in more detail. And while we're trying to get to a point where we can have a set of specific actions that we can publish in the roadmap, I do see we have this sort of slide pack in the office. I see this slide pack as being a bit of a living document, because each time we have a meeting, we identify another thing and people point us to work that they're doing. So there is a point in time at which we will aim to publish the sort of the core actions, but there is inevitably lots of work sort of constantly ongoing in this area. Just on the next slide, I just wanted to highlight, in case there were more academics and researchers in the audience today, was our areas of research interest. So what came out quite a lot in the recommendations was that there was a lot of research to be done, and actually that the research recommendations were the ones that were the enabling actions to a lot of other things. So we knew something would need to happen in a certain area, but in order to know what that thing exactly was, further research would be required. So in order to sort of signal, but also to help coordinate with some of the funding and link that to impacts, we've put together some areas of research interest. Sorry, the formatting seems to have gone a bit wrong, so you can't actually read some of the things in the tables. But effectively, this is just an example one that we've put together on the physical infrastructure side. So, when we're thinking about decontamination infrastructure, what's the current state of play? What would you need depending on different locations and areas? What types of models would you be looking at? And what are the benefits for different types of product categories? So there's a whole range of different things and different areas that we want to make sure that we're signaling in terms of interest from the program's perspective. The more of these sessions I do, the more people I meet. So please, if you have certain areas that you think are core and that when we set these out, they think are missing, please do let us know, and we're very happy to involve you and get you to join the collaborative. So just on the next slide, next one, just to sum up where we're gone. Oh, this has gone a bit different color as well. So we're just trying to get, we're at that stage where we're trying to get it all written down. And Georgie and I were talking about the challenges in terms of writing these reports, of summarizing a year's worth of work and 80 people's worth of a collaborative's worth of work into a report that is, comprehensive, but isn't so long that no one will read it. So we have taken the approach at the moment that we are going to write it all down, and we're aiming to finish that document during the course of March, and then we will try and sort of strip it back to make it more of a usable document. But I think what has become very apparent is just how much there is here, and just how much work has kind of happened across the group over the last year. So it's been really great. But I think one of the key points is that the initial sort of recommendation that we got was that vision external policy piece. So we are aiming to publish a roadmap, and that is what we're in the process of drafting at the moment. So we will aim to get that out. I cannot give you a timeline on that, so preempt questions. There are other things going on this year, so I have to try and fit that into whatever publication timeline I can get at the moment. But we will aim to get it out as soon as possible. And that will be the sort of concluding point of this phase of the project, but admittedly that starts the biggest phase of the project, which is the actual progression of the actions. So we've already started doing that, and as I said, the workshops have been to identify specific projects, which we've already started working on with a range of different stakeholders, and stakeholders are working on with each other without our involvement. So that has already started, regardless of the publication. And we will be continuing to sort of workshop the rest of the problem statements. We've only done 3 to date. So that's sort of a whistle-stop tour of what we've done and where we've got to. And very excited about kicking off the next phase. But also it's great to see all of the work set up in the various reports. So again, thank you to the CE Hub for doing that. I will leave it there. Sorry, I don't know if I've gone over time, Georgie.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Karen. It's really good to see the direction of travel, and kind of appreciate the challenge of sort of convening so many different stakeholders and perspectives. So we look forward to seeing the roadmap once it's published. So going to hand over now to Sanko Dimov, who, as I mentioned before, is Senior Net Zero Delivery Manager at NHS England.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Fiona. And yeah, thank you very much for having me today. If you want to go to the next slide, amazing. So yeah, where to begin? So as a Senior Net Zero Delivery Manager at NHS, I look after the emissions associated with our supply chain. And as part of that, circularity obviously comes into question as well. And what I wanted to talk about today was just to give a really high level overview of what we're doing about circularity in the NHS. And I think, yeah, just sort of building on a little bit of the conversations that we've had with Fiona and Karen and sort of to date. But before I launch into talking about circularity, just in case there's people on the call who aren't familiar with the Greener NHS programme or where that sits in the NHS more widely, I just want to give a bit of context that our programme exists sort of off the back of the general awareness that climate change really is one of the greatest sort of risks or challenges to human health. And for that reason, the NHS is committed to achieving net zero by 2045. And that net zero commitment really wouldn't be possible without working with our supply chain, as our emissions, 2/3 of our emissions are directly associated with our suppliers. And a lot of those emissions wouldn't be directly under the control of the NHS, but actually down to the control of our suppliers and their operations themselves. And I think something which sort of symbolises the way we prioritise that is this net zero supplier roadmap. And so this has existed for a few years now. And so you can see these first or the top 3 milestones really are related to working with our suppliers to recognise where their emissions or environmental impacts lie, starting to progressively report on a greater proportion of those emissions, and us using a sort of NHS buying power to demonstrate that we're aligning with suppliers who are doing that. But all of those emissions or those milestones that I've mentioned today are very, they're almost organizational level. But I think many of you will recognize on the call, when we talk about MedTech, we're really talking about a sort of a product level focus. And the final milestone here really, while it's still brief and this is something we're developing in the background, this is really speaking to our move towards circularity and commitment to reducing the emissions associated with our products. And I can't remember if it was mentioned earlier, apologies, I was having some internet issues, but 10% of NHS emissions are associated directly with the use of medical devices. So it is very important we address those. So now to get into circularity, if you could move to the next slide. So for the last few years, we've had a lot of conversations with internal stakeholders about what do we need to do to make changes to the way we use medical devices, and where do we begin? And we found that there's this sort of interdependence between these 3 high-level themes. And I think a lot of the themes that Fiona and Karen mentioned all fit into these areas, and you'll recognise the overlap. But it's really just acknowledging that if we want to make a change to a medical device that we're using in practice, that will require a change in the skills or our workforce and the way the way they're advised to use those instruments. And if we're making changes at that level, that will have an operational impact. So do we have the reuse infrastructure? Do we have the reverse logistics to enable those clinicians to have reusable devices available to them and for them to be reused? And also that there's an accompanying changes to regulations, both national and local, in terms of infection prevention control, or even just the way devices are manufactured. So you can recognize the interdependence there, and all of that really plays. It was very visible to our suppliers, who need very clear signs showing that the entire industry is moving, or the ecosystem rather, is moving in this direction to give a big commitment. And so the next few slides, I'll just touch on some of the things we're doing in those three areas. But just on the little image on the right there, sorry, on the previous slide, was just recognizing that when we talk about circularity in the NHS, we're kind of talking about the waste hierarchy. And so we're talking about reducing the use of devices where possible. And if we can't reduce the use, can we make that device reusable? And if it can't be reused directly, does it need to be remanufactured or reprocessed, and so on? But yeah, thank you. If you can move to the next slide. So I think one of the things that I took away is really important and really valuable from the report was just this idea of alignment, and some work that we did with Chantal Rosanne through a policy fellowship was recognizing just quite how diverse the number of actors in this ecosystem are, and that each of them have different requirements for the product, and may also have different requirements in terms of what sustainability means for them. And I think what the report does really well is acknowledging that actually, if we want to move towards a circular medtech industry, we really need to all work together and have common sets of targets. And that's why I think it's really fantastic that Karen's team at the Department of Health are leading that piece of work, which can hopefully bring all the stakeholders around the table to make sure that our suppliers are getting a cohesive message, a clear message as to where we want them to move. So yeah, a big part of what we're doing on policy and regulation is just making sure that we're working closely with these different bodies to align all our policies. Next slide. And talking about operations, and so operations, I think was referred to in earlier slides, kind of infrastructure and facilities. I think a big part of what we're focusing on here is the opportunities that we can find through research and innovation. And I think for this audience as well, I just really wanted to highlight the different competitions that we've got open here, which are often open to both academia and industry, but through partnership as well is really what we're looking to see. And through these various different innovation funds that we've run, we've generated so much learning and a lot of really interesting projects. And one of those projects features the case study in the report. So those of you who are familiar with the work of Tom Dawson in Revolution Zero will see that the comprehensive sort of change to reusable personal protective equipment that they're doing with Revolution Zero has been really yeah, I guess I'd say like a breath of fresh air for us, because it's not just replacing what would have been a single-use gown with a reusable gown, but actually providing all of the infrastructure and logistics and quality control required to make sure that that's a safe decision. And so that's exactly the kind of thing we're looking to see here and continuing to support through these different funds. Next slide. And just the final of the three sections was people and skills. And I think we'll all recognize that just because you have a circular product doesn't mean you've solved the problem. Actually, that very much has to be used in a circular way, and people have to be aware of the changes to practice that are associated with that. And the wider Greener NHS programme isn't just looking at medical devices and how they're used. So actually, that medical device part would fall into this bottom right there, where you've got circular economy principles and low carbon care. But you'll see the way we're trying to reduce emissions and reduce our sort of maybe dependence on high volume medical devices might be through just trying to keep people healthier in the first place, or avoiding the need to go into a clinical setting where PPE would automatically be used altogether. And yeah, just accompanying all of these different changes is just a lot of workforce training happening, both sort of from a national perspective in terms of rolling out training for entire specialities, for example, but there's a lot of amazing innovative work happening at a local level. And I think yeah, we're always keen to sort of keep an eye on what trusts are doing and the way they're showing leadership in the space too. Next slide. And yeah, so just coming to time now, this is just a final slide just to recognize that often it can feel like a small change if you're changing just one device, but actually all of these things add up, and the NHS carbon footprint plus, so the total footprint for the NHS makes up 5% of UK emissions, and so it's a really substantial area of focus. And of those 5% of emissions, 66% come from our supply chain. And with the various sort of different requirements we're putting into place, we're capturing almost 90% of that spend. And so, yeah, this just aside to emphasize that point earlier, that through working together, we can really make a sizable change here. But I think that's my last slide. Fantastic. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Sanko. It's really good to see kind of evidence of how circular economy can contribute towards meeting net zero targets, and also the important role that innovation and research can play, both across industrial partners, but also in collaboration with academia. So thank you very much. Just going to pass on now to our final speaker, Chris Taylor from Philips. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks my previous speakers. So just a quick overview of Philips. If you can just zoom to the next slide, please. Apologies for the graphics there. We'll crack straight on. But so at Philips, sustainability and ultimately circular economy has been a kind of integral part of our long-term commitment to improving people's lives. And it's something we've kind of now integrated into every aspect of Philips' life. We were the first health tech company to achieve carbon neutrality in our own operations. But one of the, and that's obviously through reducing our carbon footprint. But one of the other areas that's probably unique and where we have got recognition from the CDP, for example, is our interactions with our own supply chain. And we won a special CDP recognition through the work we do to reduce that carbon footprint. And as Sanko has quite eloquently put in the last discussion, that is a massive part of our footprint. So working there has been one of the integral parts. Eco-design is one of the things that we use circularity in. We have 5 aspects within that covers energy, weight, substances, circularity, that the equipment is circular ready, and the packaging. And we kind of apply that circular economy thinking through each of those areas, and look at areas like how we can reduce the energy ultimately of equipment from one creation to the next, reducing its weight, because by reducing weight we're reducing the use of raw materials, and being circular ready, that we can use it for longer or reuse it as necessary through that process. 25 years now we've been looking at refurbishing systems as well, although we've not particularly drove that in the UK. It is something now we are looking to do a little bit more of. Education is a big part of the work we do in circular economy. We work very closely with the University of Exeter, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and raising awareness, especially around circular economy principles, is something that we're very passionate about doing. As I say, we integrate that into everything we do, products, services. We see circularity as a key part of our performance and being a successful company moving forward. Collaboration ultimately is key in all these exercises. We work with a lot of government organisations and non-government organisations, other businesses. I chair a sustainability focus group for AXREM, which is an industry group for similar companies to Philips, like your GEs, Siemens, etc., Canon, where we all come together and work also very closely with the NHS supply chain, etc., and looking at ways that we can meet the NHS roadmap. Circularity is usually a big part of that, and something we are trying to introduce more and educate people more on the benefits of that, reducing waste, recycling, etc., as part of that. And hopefully, as it shows here, these partnerships is one of the successful parts that we're showing as you can do this work and be successful as a company, you know, as you move forward. We're using renewable energy 100% of the time. 1% of the waste that we do create, we try to recirculate. None of it goes to landfill, and we are now progressing our circular products and solutions sales. At the current moment, it says 18% there. I believe as of last year, 2023, we're up to about 22% now. Our target is to be 25% by 2025. So we're well on track for that one as we move forward. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit more details on the, this is half of the butterfly diagram that I'm sure you've seen many times before. So what we're trying to do basically here is kind of the smaller circles use as much as we can, and the kind of recycle path is our last kind of resort. So we're trying to keep it in the bottom part as much as possible. We link kind of circular economy thinking with carbon footprint reduction, waste minimization, resource efficiency. These are all, we feel, you know, key parts of our kind of global approach, and ultimately reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, which we believe will be something in the remit of around 40% is what we're looking at. So rethinking how we approach this. So we want to use less, use longer, and use again is kind of part of our ethos as doing this. Recirculating parts, taking components that we've recovered from responsible trade-ins and giving them a second life is one of those things that, you know, that we're really trying to push. So we're not extracting those raw materials as much as possible. We have this new refurbished systems now. We're calling it the Circular Edition. Nice little name that links us into the circular economy, and that just kind of shows the commitment we're making in this area. We're also looking at new kind of business models where we're shifting from this capital purchase selling approach and actually looking at products or systems that we can offer as a service. So as it says there, monitoring as a service is one area where we're doing that. We also obviously we want to use longer, so anything that increases product lifetime expansion. So it says technology maximizer there. So that's kind of when we install a system, we look at upgrades, both hardware and software that we can apply through the lifetime to increase that lifetime. Usually you're talking 5 to 7 years for the smaller equipment, so that's like your ultrasounds, and then the big iron, as we call it, so MR, CT, X-ray, you're really looking at 10 years on standard. What we're trying to do now is push that envelope, so your ultrasounds are moving up to kind of 10 years. Your big iron stuff is like 15, 20 is the ambition, is to really like push that that footprint as we move forward. Digitalization as well, we see as a big part of reducing physical resource consumption. For example, moving to the cloud. I'm sure you've all heard about that exercise, but you know, we're seeing figures of like 25% savings on hardware if we move to cloud-based solutions rather than on-site or on-premises operations, and also reducing physical visits with things like telemedicine, and we're seeing that appointments can be reduced by like 50 to 70 times, which is a massive reduction in carbon footprint. I know the Imperial College did an exercise, I think it was a couple of years ago, on a CT scan, and they showed that 60% of the CT scan's carbon footprint was down to patient travel. So obviously, anything we can do to reduce patient travel is a big win for us. Next slide, please. So this is just going into these circular systems, and it's just a little bit more detail on what we do. This is an example of an MR, for example. So we start with cleaning and disinfecting. So that's obviously a key part of this. Cosmetic appearance, we want these things to look as new. We don't want to throw away plastics, because obviously that's the bad thing. So what we do is sand and respray on those. All the components are then tested. Defective parts that we do identify are replaced. We update these things to the very latest software. The latest updates are applied. And then the system is configured as per customer needs, because like one of the final steps. That is then fully checked and quality assured before shipping out. So that on an MR, it's about 329 hours, believe it or not. It varies from system to system. So an MR is probably the most labour intensive of all these processes. CT, for example, will be about 212. Ultrasounds are down about 80, something like that. We did actually have 2 ultrasounds at ECR last week. One was new and one was refurbished. And one of the tests that we did was, could you identify the difference between the two systems? And it was, I will be honest, the refurbished system was slightly more, I mean, it was something like 4951, something like that. But some of the people that were who thought they were, really clued up on ultrasounds still guessed it wrong. So it was quite nice to see that just from a cosmetic looking, they couldn't really identify the issue. But this whole kind of ethos around use less, use longer, use again is where we see this circularity, and where we're now looking to see what we can do, because it obviously has a lot of benefits. Something like 78% saving in weight, which is obviously a massive saving in your carbon footprint, because you're not using those raw materials. On average, it's about 25% cheaper. So again, there's savings there, and we're not ultimately, getting those raw materials out. So this is one area that we're looking to work and partner to develop moving forward, and change the mindset, because ultimately that is one of the things that we need to address as part of this exercise. And I think that's it. I think that was a bit of a whistle top of Philips. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Many thanks, Chris. It's really interesting to hear from a manufacturer perspective, to see all of the different things that you're doing and ways that you're considering circularity across the business. So thank you very much to all of our speakers. We've got a little bit of time left for questions, and we've had quite a few questions in the chat, but if you want to come on and ask a question, please do raise your hand. So we've got a couple of questions. Initially, one from Gavin. I think this was to Georgie, but anyone else feel free to jump in as well. Where could we find the data on devices that are eligible for remanufacture?
I'm not sure that I can answer that one in terms of the list. I'm assuming you're meaning the list of devices that are eligible for remanufacture. I think that would be something through the MHRA. Don't know whether Peter's on the call, or Sanko, if you've got a thought around that.
One to follow up on for me, I think if you'd be happy to share that question again, I can think about it and see where the best place to go is.
Peter's jumped in. He may have.
Yeah, I think eligibility is, as you say, is defined by the MHRA, the nominating body. But when we spoke to Vanguard, in theory, any device is potentially eligible. But you have to demonstrate. You have to demonstrate that you can remanufacture or repurpose against the requirements set out by the MHRA. So it's how long is a piece of string? But as you know, George, and you mentioned it, there are many more devices that are deemed that are being used that are remanufactured in the US and Germany and other countries than there are in the UK. which raises a big question of if you can do it in those countries, why can't we do it in the UK? What's holding us back over and above what we've heard today?
Great, thank you. And then I think this was another question from the Spotlight report. So Victoria has asked how you're calculating the carbon savings, and is this measuring the carbon emissions of in-person versus digital services?
Presuming relating to the case study that we shared, the illustrative example. So I might ask Peter to come in on that, because I don't think we were accounting for travel.
No, the travel was taken into account in terms of the remanufacturing and logistics, but it was on a like-for-like basis. And we took the carbon data from a published LCA that is available if people want to read it and have access to it. And as you say, in other cases, and there's a very good database of LCAs that Chantal, that was mentioned by one of the earlier speakers, includes patient travel as part of some of the LCAs, which is a significant component of some devices where there's a significant amount of travel that can be avoided or reduced.
Fantastic, thank you. Lena, you have a question for Sanko. I don't know whether you want to come on and ask your question.
Sure, I can do that. I'm not camera shy. Yeah, so just wondering, Sanko, is there any? I know the dates and stuff are just coming in 2023, 2024, and so on. But when do you expect to have like that first kind of progress report to show industry and healthcare that, hey, progress is being made? Because it feels like we're hearing a lot of all the negative, this is what we need to do and everything, but I think it'd be good to show the progress that's being made in a whole.
It's a really good question, Lena, and I think that's something. Yeah, so at the moment, I suppose probably my presentation did just sort of speak to maybe those challenges more, as opposed to going into detail of examples. And the stage that we're at the moment it's a little bit difficult to give examples as a holistic solution for what we're doing for circular economy, because actually there's a lot of smaller ideas which we're seeking to grow and scale. And so I mentioned support for organizations like Revolution Zero, but then there's lots of other initiatives happening across the NHS, such as reusing walking aids or reducing the amount of materials on surgical trays, or moving to more reusable devices on surgical trays. Then there's a lot of work around sort of digitization. There's work with reducing paper, etc. But a lot of those things at the moment feel like in a small or one part of our vast supply chain. I think Fiona or Georgie mentioned earlier, we have over 500,000 products on the NHS supply chain, and so we're in this situation at the moment where we don't want to report on a one-by-one basis what the progress is, but actually in a holistic way, and it's just taking us a little bit of extra time to get there. But yeah, I would really hope to be able to give a report, and if that would be valuable to people, as to the different progress happening in sort of a more holistic way. Yeah, we would be very keen to get that out there.
Great, thank you very much, Sanko. And Khalid, you've got a question.
Hiya, yeah, good afternoon. And my question is to Karen. So thank you very much for a very insightful presentation. I was actually part of the early stages of the process. So during the I think the initial workshop. So really keenly following the progress so far. I think my question is around collaboration, because of course that you've alluded to, not that alluded to, actually clearly there is a very broad network of collaborators and stakeholders, which in road mapping I think is very core, but then it's also a very difficult task to actually keep all of them in one bucket and have sort of each contributing in a very meaningful way. So how do you manage your collaboration ecosystem, and how do you make sure that you don't have any sort of redundancies, and it's like sort of basically you're able to milk all of your stakeholders, you know, in a very efficient manner to contribute towards the roadmap that you're developing? Thank you.
Thanks, Hedis. That's a great question. Don't know whether I'll own up to milking my stakeholders, but it is a goal. So I think, I mean, it is a challenge, and I think I joined the project in December, and I was just like pleasantly surprised at just how involved everybody is, but just the scale of stakeholders involved. So we've done a bit of a mix, I think. So we try and do regular big events for those who can't engage on a regular basis but have an interest. So we did a big event last March. We did another in November. Those are the sort of big milestone ones where we can sort of feedback and then get views for the next round. And then we have been, so in the sort of first phase, we did a lot of working groups which worked together, and the CE Hub were instrumental in facilitating those. For this round, because we've been trying to get to the crux of, you know, so what is the exact, you know, what's the project, what's the action, who's involved, who's doing it. We have done it on a smaller scale in terms of the workshops, so identified key stakeholders and done those workshops. And also have done some follow-up one-to-ones with people. So I think the answer to that is very much it's a range, but you know, I think there will always be moments where you go, oh, I should have brought that person in for that workshop. But inevitably it's sort of that mix between having too many people there so you don't get into the nitty-gritty of it, but enough people there that you get the wide range of expertise, and there's a huge amount of expertise out there. So as I said, I think excuse me, we're aiming to get to a point where we have, you know, the vision set out, the clear sort of policy direction, and the clear next steps. But I do think it's going to be a bit of a living document, and one of the things we need to think about is sort of how we do the updates on the back of that, because there will be inevitably more things happening and more things that people are interested in getting involved in. So I forgot to put the mailing, the email address in the slides, so I've put it in the chat for those of you that are not currently involved but interested in being involved.
That's great. Thank you very much. Great answer.
Just say while I have my unmute, I saw somebody asked about the REs, and yes, very happy to share. And we haven't had the workshop on those yet, so they're very much draft. So we will be setting something up to try and sort of deep dive into those. So they are very much on the back of the feedback that we've got, but we are starting to try and validate those and get broader views and see that we've got a sufficient coverage. So very keen on getting more input into those. And if you're part of the collaborative, you will get the emails about those in due course.
Fantastic, thank you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but it's fantastic to see so many people sharing resources in the chat. So we'll make sure that we capture those. And as I mentioned earlier, this webinar has been recorded, so we will upload that to the Circular Economy Hub website, and we'll make sure that those resources are captured as well. So I'd just like to thank all of our fantastic speakers. We've really covered a lot in this webinar, but this could go on because there is so much to cover, and it's so complex, but it's fantastic to see all of the work that is going on in this sector and the progress that's being made. Please do visit our Hub website for all of our past webinars that cover a whole range of different sectors and different elements related to circular economy, and also the Spotlight report that focuses on MedTech is available now to download. So have a wonderful rest of your day. Really great to see so many of you, and see you in our next webinar. Thank you very much.